Look, if I think back to Cycling Tips over all the years, the one thing I can really hand on heart say about that organisation is integrity is number one, like journalistic integrity.
And you could also see that in the content. I think that you could see that in people being kind of excited about the things that they were putting out. It was genuinely impressive, sort of the culture that was built at that point.
CT didn't end the way that it should have. When it all started to fall apart, there was a real feeling from the community that this would be missed. A lot of us, and certainly Wade, had this feeling of unfinished business.
From Escape Collective, this is Overnight Success, the podcast about the entrepreneurs, the personalities, and the passionate people who make up the sport of cycling and the stories behind the icons they've built.
G'day, listeners. We've got a bit of a different episode for you this time round. My name is Mitch Docker, and I am the host of the Life in the Peloton podcast. Now, instead of monologuing about his story, Wade has asked me to come in and host this episode and ask him how he built the business of CyclingTips. That amazing story that hasn't been told in one place. Guys, I hope you enjoy it. Sit back, relax, and here we go. Well, let's start. Let's talk about, because what I want to do, I actually want to find out who Wade Wallace is before we move into the story of CyclingTips. I don't actually know the story of how you ended up in Australia and how you ended up, you know, as a cycling sort of fanatic, a fan, you know, a real fan of the sport. Take me back to Canada, and I just initially think, surely you played ice hockey.
Yeah, like any good Canadian kid, from the moment I could almost walk, I was on ice, and you played ice hockey, and 9 months of the year, that's what you did. And it was just all I knew. I remember, like, I grew up in this town of like 1,200 people, and it was a unique town because it was like a nuclear research facility was the town industry. It's called Pinawa in Manitoba, close to Winnipeg. And just looking from the outside now in, it was just an amazing way to grow up, and kind of this amazing group of friends and families and everything to grow up around. So ice hockey was the big thing, but in summers we always just, you know, BMXs and made little ramp jumps, and I got a mountain bike when that became a thing in, I don't know, mid to late 80s. Went around stuff like that. And but
in the
that
beginning, like right on those early mountain bikes.
Yeah. And Specialized, Rockhopper, Norco, something or other were my first mountain bikes. Yeah. Those were great. But again, like, we had 3 months of no snow basically, or summer, that you could do that. So cycling was, I remember it was a far off sport in a far off land. And I just remember my dad taking me, one of my first movie memories besides Star Wars was American Flyers. I don't know why my dad took me to that, but I always remember seeing it and just thinking, like, this exists.
And that's the thing. I think what I'm trying to understand here is, you know, as we know CyclingTips, and as a lot of people know CyclingTips, and we'll get to that later, is it's a breadth of knowledge of cycling there. And you'd think that it's someone who's just grown up with cycling from day dot. Their dad was a pro and they knew everything about it.
Yeah.
But it sounds like to me, and you can tell me the rest of the story here, you're just an everyday, you know, casual cyclist, just loved riding your bike as a boy. And then, you know, as you said, you got into mountain biking.
Yeah, like, and that's all cycling was. Is it was this thing I picked up and went on a couple trails or whatever. And then, you know, I went to university in a city in Canada called Calgary. And like, I remember after I graduated and I got a job, the whole reason I actually got into mountain biking was by complete mistake, and this crazy sort of turn of events where I had a job lined up. I went to my first day of the job, and it was a telecommunications company called Nortel, and the place was on fire the day I showed up. Fire engines and smoke, and I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like $15 an hour. I could buy a Mustang. I could buy a stereo. Like, I was just like, you know, young 20, whatever year old. dream come true. And the place is on fire. So anyway, I go back home and like there's no mobile phones or anything to call manager, and they got bigger problems on their hands. So I went home, and weeks later or whatever it was, I got back in touch with the manager, and I went and they said, show up this day. And there were a lot of people they were hiring at this point. So like about 100 people had kind of been affected, and we were all just sort of, corralled in and went through onboarding, and I was promptly sent to a place that made cables. Like we were making thousands of cables by hand a day. Like it was on a production line. And I'm like, yeah, I'm supposed to be like this engineering job. And I'm like, putting up my hand sheepishly, like I don't think I'm supposed to be here. And they kind of wouldn't listen. It was very hectic and stuff. So I was sitting beside a guy who was a pro mountain biker. Like he would race the World Cups and stuff, but also he would do this job for decent money in between, to fund it and everything. And I'm like, really? That happens? Yeah. Can you do that? And because I have a mountain bike, and I went out with him, and I asked him like, can you show me? And I remember him absolutely, like it was kind of an asshole thing to do. Then I think back of it, like he took me down stuff that I was nowhere prepared to. Like I was wearing cutoff jean shorts and a baseball cap. But then I went to watch him, and it was a World Cup or a Canada Cup or something like that. And I remember seeing him, warming up in the trailers and all the people and like this, like, I didn't know this existed. This is amazing. I'm like, I'm going to do that one day. Cool. You know what to think? Yes. I thought it was the most amazing thing. It captured me ever since, right? Cycling, that was it. Bought myself a $1,200 mountain bike. That's going to be the last mountain bike I'd ever have to buy because I'd spend a lot of money on it. And bought a helmet and went from there. Yeah. And
then you were in the scene, or just sort of stayed bubbling on the side because you're an engineer, as you said, and you obviously, made your bread that way or got your bread that way. So like that was just your hobby on the side, was it?
Yeah. And I never did anything in cycling notable, but that did lead to road racing and seeing Lance in 99 win the Tour de France, and that story, how that captivates everybody. And no matter how many times I hear that story, I got to hear it again in a different way. But yeah, that's where, the training for mountain biking became more on the road because it's more structured and predictable and yeah, but, just racing Cat 1, 2 around, Canada and North America and stuff. But like, you take your vacation to do it or long weekends or whatever, but that was the extent of it. Yeah.
We're sitting here in Melbourne, Australia now. Tell me about how you ended up here, because, not because, but, it wasn't cycling. Well, I don't think it was. It doesn't sound like it was for me. You were just sort of enjoying that at that level. How'd you end up here?
Quarter life crisis, I guess. I was about 30, and like I got a job offer, and we packed up, and I brought nothing but a bike, a guitar, and a suitcase. And it was a cyclocross bike, which was not seen here at all at the time. And
one of the first cyclocross bikes into Australia, I hear.
That's what I say. It probably wouldn't have been.
Well, let's fast forward to then 2008 and the first blog.
Kind of been interested in blogs, and there's this one by Seth Godin. He's like this marketeer guru, amazing blog he has written, very insightful thing, and I loved it. And the company I was working for, the same one, Nortel, went into bankruptcy in the global financial crisis in 2008. And very quickly, I was stuck there. I couldn't find another job because I was tied to my work visa to that company. No one was hiring. If they laid me off, I had to go home. I was really stuck there, right? And I wasn't ready to go home and unprepared. And so instead of going for coffee every day with my colleagues talking doom and gloom because they were literally doing nothing, I'm like, I like some people's blogs. I ate them up whenever I read them, and I'm going to do one. And I don't know what I'm going to do it about. Like, I'm not qualified to do about anything, but it was just interesting moving to Australia. Like, I would just see all these things that people do or talk about. I learned a lot because you guys were far more connected to road cycling than ever we were in North America, right? Like, it just still a far off sport. I didn't learn about things like nutrition or race tactics, or even the way we rolled in the wind was usually like there was no rhyme or reason to it, right? Like it was like I learned all that in Australia, much better. I mean, not simple things like that, but a lot of other things. And I just thought I'm just going to write about these things because they're coming to me all the time. And I was literally writing. The audience was Beach Road, like that. It wasn't like I'm going to reach this global audience. It's just I'm going to write for my friends or whatever, right? And I knew a little bit about training, but not only what I've been told to do. But thinking back, I was hugely underqualified. But at the same time, like you got to remember too, like there was nothing out there on this. Like when I Googled like how nutrition or whatever, like there was a website that was called CyclingTips that came up, and I was always Googling things like cycling tips for nutrition. And now you would call that like search engine optimization, but back then I'm just like, I want a top spot on Google because I know that's the only way people are going to find this. But it was literally 10 minutes of thought, and I opened up this Google Blogspot account. I don't know, I'll call it Cycling Tips. And what will I write about? The ride that I just did yesterday. Like it was literally at dinner and started that way. Yeah, it was nothing.
And the knowledge for that first blog, was that stuff that you went and researched yourself, or that was stuff you picked up from writing with people? Or is that just, stuff that you knew? Like, were you downplaying it because you're like, look, I already know this, but I know a lot of people want to know this, or this is stuff that I've had to go and research because I want to know this? Like, what sort of level were you thinking, like, these tips? Were you like, this is stuff that I've learned and I know people want to know it? Or what kind of vision did you have in the very beginning, if you had any?
This stuff like was not anywhere or very few places. And this sport, right? It's just the school of hard knocks. Like you learn it by rough and tough, old school people and, being at the back and all that. And I know that comes up again and again, but I wanted to break down barriers. I literally wanted to like have this information out there. And the thing is though, is there wasn't anywhere to really check this either. Like I might've been saying things that might not have been right, like that first blog post, but it wasn't investigative journalism or anything like that.
And it's a blog post. You can almost say what you want to say. You weren't trying to fool people, but if it wasn't exactly to the point, that was the beautiful thing about it.
Yeah, exactly. And I didn't know what I didn't know, right? Like, yeah, it was just me. I didn't even read it like or spell check it or anything like that. I just like this, this is how you would turn off into the wind and the crosswinds, right? I've learned that, and here's how that works. Like, look at a school of geese and how they do it, type things.
Tell me then about the next few weeks, few months. What was the roll-on effect from that? Was it just purely the enjoyment you had, or you actually started to get some feedback from people?
Yeah, like comments were a thing, right? But I remember people would comment. I'm like, wow, someone read this. But I'm like, well, I've already said my thing. I'm not going to reply to them. Like, it seems so obvious now, but it's like, no, like maybe I'll let someone else reply to them. And a good friend of mine said, no, reply to the comments. They want to engage with you, not with anybody else. And then that became a thing. Like, it was like, I was getting sometimes 400 comments post, which once I started answering them and a discussion took place, and then people started answering each other's questions or just comments or whatever. And again, these were like literally often people I knew or maybe names I didn't know, but and little things started coming my way. Like maybe someone would say, hey, I've got a DVD for a giveaway. You want to do that to your audience? But I didn't really think of them as an audience. These are, I don't know, it's a blog, right? Of just people I'm speaking to or whatever. But yeah, it was just weird thinking back. There's no intention to it. There was just like, if you these days opened up a TikTok account, right? That was the end of it.
So it sounds like to me you were getting sucked into it. The comments, it was just it was engaging for you. You put something up, people came back. It's exciting. I remember when I first started Life in the Peloton, I never had any financial gain from that. And I didn't care either because it was enough for me, and a little feedback. I'm not talking about 400 comments. I would literally get a passing by comment, 2-3 times a year. And that was enough for me because I'm like, people are liking this. So I can understand what you're talking about. It's enough for you.
Yeah. Keeps you going.
Did you think this is like ever at that point there like, oh, this is something I can really do? It was just really just something you're just bubbling away. This is 2008.
Not at all. And I remember the first advertiser I ever had was Ride Magazine. And Ride, a guy who worked with them named Toby, he contacted me. Their Tour de France edition was coming up. Can we advertise? And I'm like, I don't even know anything about this. Like, and how much? $200. I said, like, no rhyme or reason. I'm like, is that too much? Is it too little? I'll throw that out there. And he's like, yeah, cool. I just figured out how to put an image, like a GIF image that's no different than the GIF images today. And I put it up there. And I think I might have wrote a post saying like, hey, this is out now. Thank you for sponsoring it. And
cool.
That was it. And you know, at the same time I was reading like Bike Snob New York City, Fat Cyclist. There's a few others. I wish I could remember them, but there was an ecosystem of cycling blogs out there. And I wanted, like, that rose my level, right? Like, that was like, ooh, I gotta, like, Bike Snob, my God, this guy was a phenomenal writer and hilarious. And he was the gold standard, right? He was just absolutely what I wanted to be, but didn't have the personality. So I had to do something different. And Inner Ring was also one that came up not too far after. And that was I really still enjoy what he does. I still go there every day.
So what was happening outside of the blog then? Because as you said, you know, the business as an engineer was in trouble. What was the next step for you then?
I got laid off. It would just became every day suits would come in and you just knew there's another round of 100 people being laid off. And finally, you know, I got laid off while there were still severance packages, so which bought me some time. But I was still looking for jobs. I was applying for jobs, and I remember I think I had about 3 advertisers at the time. It was Bike Force, a place called Cycling Edge, and I'm trying to remember now if it was Ride who kept on advertising. I think they were. Long story short, I was still applying for jobs, but that gave me enough money to like pay our rent. But I finally got a job in that was mostly in India. I had to travel to India for like weeks at a time, and
as an engineer,
yeah. And I'm like, geez, I come all the way and bring my now wife all the way to Australia, and now I'm just going to displace her and be in India all the time and back and forth, and like, but like, you got to do what you got to do, like, you know, and it was kind of tough time with the economy, and like, what else am I going to do? Just not accept this job and hang out until the perfect one comes? Then
I can't live off this blog.
Can't live off the blog. But I remember my wife and I were taking a walk down the beach, and just one night, and I said like, should I do this? And like, same concerns as I just spoke about. And she's like, well, we're paying our rent off this blog. Like, why don't you just stick with it? And that was the first time where I'm like, should this be something that makes us money and we can depend on it? But that was that first sort of, I wasn't looking for it, but a show of support that gave me a little bit of freedom to say, no, I won't take that job. And
Did it get you excited inside? Like, this is something I really love doing on the side. Imagine I could do this as my job and I don't have to go and work and then come home and try and do the thing that I find fun.
It still never crossed my mind. Yeah. Like, this is not a job.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know, having if I had an Instagram account with 100,000 followers where I don't know. Like, I know a lot of people do take that as a job right now, but that wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
It wasn't a thing. I did get another consulting role here in Melbourne. I hated it, but I still did the blog every single night when I got home. That was my commitment. Every weekday I would do a blog post, and you just get in the habit, right? And as you know, like you set it in and you do it. And but like every vacation I would take, I'd be blogging about it. And if there was a cycling connection or whatever, it was Wade's story in the end, right? Because I started realizing that dry tips of like, here's what you do. It's so much better when you wrap it in a story. But I always tried to sort of have some information in a story, and it became Wade's story in the end. Yeah.
Tell me about Rafa and how you became involved with Rafa, because I think, you know, you can tell the story yourself, but I get the feeling it was a big part of you developing cycling tips into something exactly what you just said there as a job, that transition of I'm moving 100% into the cycling industry now.
Yeah. Rafa was a big fork in the road moment because the way that happened was a good friend of mine. He was doing soigneur work for the Rafa Condor Sharp team. And when they came for the Herald Sun Tour, and they sort of hire local people, Andy Naylor, if you know that name. Mm-hmm. And Andy said, like, you want to come and do some, just drive the van, get some hotel rooms, check people in and stuff. And I think that was 2009. And I almost guarantee you would have been racing with Drapac at the time, that Sun Tour, or someone.
Yeah, I think maybe I came back and rode for the Australian team. It was my first year pro. And I came back and rode, with Richie Port was in that Aussie team, yeah.
Really? Mm. So like Darren Lapthorne, Simon Thompson from GCN.
Cy Richardson.
Tom
Southam.
Tom Southam. And I remember Tom, like he because I was kind of racing in the, NRS level and see you guys there sometimes. And Tom, when he was racing with Drapac, and I remember Tom, like he was the first one who sort of like, I've seen your face around, and he really welcomed me into that team because I was really awkwardly like, just helping out, but also like, I'm going to write blogs about this every day too. Mm. And through that, like blogging and being with the team, I got this relationship with someone at Rafa in marketing, say, can we use your photos and stuff for this and to do some stuff? And can you write a blog post for us maybe on their site? I'm like, yeah, cool. And then after that relationship, long story short, I started working for Rafa as an agent in Australia, where I basically just sort of set up the local market, did local events, told them what they need to do here, feet on the ground here, right? Mm. And I just basically got a commission of online sales. And then we established this as a subsidiary in Australia and New Zealand and grew the business from there. But all well, I'd wake up at 5 a.m. I'd go for my ride. I'd come back, do a blog post until about 11 a.m. I would do Rafa all afternoon and early evening because the phone calls started with Europe. And I've never been so incredibly busy in my life, but also like wrapped up, like living my dream, everything to do with cycling and soaking up everything I could learn from Rafa about operating an online business. And I was employee 40 something at Rafa. And like I had weekly calls with Simon Mottram, who he was just like hustling as well, looking back. So like it was a very small company at the time and just getting going and set it up here in Australia. And eventually it was a fork in the road of CyclingTips is actually starting to make real money now. And I'm trying to do it all. And Rafa was like, that was good too. But like, you probably know what you would do if you had something of your own versus a job, and that's just the decision I made too. But it was a big decision at the time.
Oh, I can totally see that because going out on your own, it's scary. I'm at that crux at the moment. I'm at that point where it's like life in the peloton is building up to a business, but I have that same question: is it a business?
Yeah.
Is it something? You know, I know it's something, but is it something? You know.
Yeah.
And there's other businesses well set up, established, and you can just roll into the mold. But would I ever be happy there?
Yeah.
Not having my own flavor on it, even if it comes down to the way things look. So I can understand that, and I can see it now why you did that. It's very easy from here and now knowing everything that's happened. But on the same note, you can also look at Rafa and go, well, that could have also been an awesome pathway being there from the beginning. Is there any, I guess there's no regrets, but, did you ever think that at any point after that decision?
Well, after that, no. I mean, I'm so happy the way it all turned out and everything. But at the time, Rafa was like this new, aspirational, innovative brand that was breaking every mold in cycling, right? And to be on that train with so few people and it was amazing. It was really, really cool. And you learned a lot. But I also had this other thing, and it didn't feel like I was really jumping off a cliff because there was money coming in, right? Far more money than Rafa, just through advertising. but it was getting too hard. I couldn't sustain, 5 a.m. till 11 p.m. every day of working. And I remember going into Simon's office, and I was in London at the time, and I just was fretting about telling him because he, that put him in a bad situation. And, but he was, he knew he couldn't turn that around. My mind was already made up, and he gracefully let me, encourage me to do my own thing. And that was good. And he had been through it before himself, so I'm sure he knew. And then the journey started from there.
All that time in Rapha, I guess, you're seeing Rapha start as a company. You were there in the beginning. Were you taking mental notes about, okay, this is sort of how a business sort of gets going?
Not as much that as understanding that if I wanted to actually make a go of this, and knowing the business I was in, as in like it's advertising, having the hat on of someone who would potentially advertise with, say, CyclingTips, and me also being on that side as well, and knowing what they would want and that type of thing. Not as much, an online business like that. It just a very different thing, but it was also like just the way they did everything was, it was a mess in the background, right? It was absolutely, but it was just a scramble and hustle, but it was so polished out front, right? And maybe just the realities that it made me comfortable with. That's the way it is and stuff. But I mean, I did get a lot out of working with them, and someone like Simon, like, there's two people I asked myself when I asked myself, like, what would Simon do and what would Seth do? Seth Godin, that first blog, whenever I have a tough choice on my hands, I asked, like, Simon Mockstrom. He was a very, unwitting mentor of mine. Like, he wasn't formally, but, I always cherish my conversations with him and stuff because he is such a amazing mind, the most perceptive person I think I've ever met. This podcast is fully funded by our members at Escape Collective. In fact, all of our content on our website and our podcast network is 100% supported by our members who believe that cycling media should be independent from the sport and industry we cover, and that we should exist to serve you rather than live or die by our ability to be a platform for the sole purpose of selling you more stuff. If you enjoy this podcast or any of our other work and believe in our mission of independence, please go to escapecollective.com/join and become a member today. Thank you for your support.
So you go out on your own now, and that's it. This is it. We're happening. CyclingTips is happening. At what point there were you like, I need some help here. I need to get someone else on this, or multiple people, or was it just, I'm going to fly solo here for a while?
It wasn't that I needed help. I knew I needed help, but first thing I knew I needed to do was, here I am doing commercial deals with advertisers, but I'm also reviewing their product. And I knew I needed to separate that relationship. And I didn't know anything about media or editorial best practices or anything. I just knew that felt weird, that I'm the one saying that this bike is good or whatever. And meanwhile, I'm also getting paid for this. So I knew that needed to actually stop. And I was never called out, but I just knew that this was not the way it should be done. And so I did put a call out. I said, I need a tech editor, someone who was going to be able to do reviews, because I didn't really know what I was talking about anyway, right? I'd be like, yeah, this feels nice. It's
light.
$10,000 bike. It's amazing. Yeah. So I did a call out just on the blog, like you could do, like you might do on Instagram these days, and said, hey, who wants to be a tech editor? And I got a surprising amount of people come back and email me. But there was this one guy named Matt Wickstrom. He was like a immunologist researcher at the University of Western Australia, I think. And like he's a scientist, right? He's got a PhD, and he wanted to do this as well. And I'm like, wow, like, all right, well, let's write something and see how it goes. But he had just an amazing sort of way about him, of the way he articulated himself when he wrote to me and that. And he was very promising. And I had some sort of younger options as well, but I thought this didn't feel right in the way of like where he is in life and everything, but also he was a really unique person that I just couldn't pass by. And he became our first tech editor, and he did a phenomenal job. Like he was amazing, and but he wasn't paid either, right? It was like, yeah, whenever you get a chance, just write something. And
so, were you sending in products across to him, or any products that need to be done? You're like, just send them across to WA, and I won't have anything to do with it. Did you want to see the products as well, or you just like, no, totally give faith in you?
No, total give faith in Matt, and that was the whole point. Is the right hand shouldn't be talking to the left hand, as in, the commercial guy. But I was also writing blogs as well, right? Like, but just if you're going to be writing or reviewing a bike, like you can't be compromised by saying like it's no good. Like that's just a tough thing to do. And so I recognize that, thankfully, immediately, and I think that was a good choice in hindsight.
Tell me about when Matt Deneef came involved, 2013. I understand it was a big decision for you. Things were moving forward. Tell me a little bit about that.
So I had quit Rafa and was doing this with just me and myself and Matt Wickstrom. And I had a lot of guest posts and stuff like that too. Like that allowed me a day of not writing. And as you want to keep improving. So it kept on getting longer and longer. So I knew I needed someone to take the whole content part off my hands a little bit, at least, so I could start focusing on growing this as a business.
I was a big fan of CyclingTips and had followed it since it started, really.
This is Matt Deneef, Wade's first formal hire at CyclingTips back in 2013.
I was a blogger myself. I ran a blog about climbing uphill and all the great climbs around Melbourne and Victoria. And I was also a journalist at the time at a website called The Conversation. And Wade followed both my blog and the site that I worked for. And when he was looking to expand CyclingTips, he got in touch and asked me if I'd be interested in joining. CyclingTips really was a landmark publication in the cycling space here in Australia, certainly, and grew to be much further beyond that. And so the opportunity to be involved in that was, one that I was very keen to take.
I asked him if he wanted to work for me, and he took this massive leap of faith, and it was my first employee. And it was, along with like getting married and having a baby and moving to Australia, like that, those are that handful of huge decisions of my life. Which,
it's your baby, it's something you built up, and it's transitioning, as you said then, from something that's just fun to do. And you, in the back of your mind, I know you still care, but you tell yourself the whole time, you know what, if this turns into nothing, who cares?
Yeah.
But actually, in the back of your mind, you would be pissed off. But now suddenly people are involved. So now you almost like you tell yourself, this can't fail, and I don't want this to fail. This is something I've built up too big. I've spent too much time now. I get the feeling that's what sort of happened when you've got Matt now involved. Now you're like, okay, Matt's working out. I want to bring Andy in. Or is it, what were the steps to follow?
I'd just been made redundant, and I was about to have a kid. I wasn't sure what to do.
This is Andy Van Bergen, Wade's second hire at CyclingTips back in 2013.
I was doing a little bit of consulting work, in the cycling industry, just a few little bits and pieces here and there. And then Matt calls me up out of the blue, and he's like, listen, Andy, so I'm obviously working at CyclingTips. It's just me and Wade. We are about to go across to the Tour de France. Wade has just landed his biggest client ever, which is Eurosport, and there's no way he's going to be able to service it because obviously the two of us, we've got to be taking photos, writing articles, everything like that. So he wants to know, would you come on and kind of service that client? And then at the same time, while you're working there, if you happen to be able to land a couple of clients, then you pay for your role and maybe there's a job there for you if you're interested. And I was like, hell yeah. And I just saw this as an opportunity to just throw myself into this full on. So I definitely oversold it to my wife, Tam. I made it sound like I had a job that wasn't there, and I worked like 7 days a week on this for a month while they're at the tour. I did land a couple of clients. Eurosport, the campaign went really well. They won a couple of industry awards off the back of it, which was really good. And I had a job after that.
What about in that earlier time there, the ideas, there's sort of morphing now, like you said, it's no longer Wade's story, and the CyclingTips, were they running out? I'm talking about the actual tips.
Yeah.
when at this point here were you starting to go, look, I want to go across and cover the tour now as a more of a journalistic sort of style? What's going on in races? When was that sort of transition?
You're right. Like the tips, like you can only say so much, right? And then after a while, I'm like, what would be the ultimate thing is if I got Mitch Docker or someone to write, like someone who knows this stuff for real, to write for me every once in a while and tips and stuff. And it was quite an interesting moment where I think I articulated that maybe in the comments or wherever. And people are like, no, we want to hear from someone relatable on our level. We don't want to hear from somebody who we can't relate to, who we're never going to be as good at. So I like, well, that's interesting.
Damn it. I'm stuck doing these tips.
Stuck doing this. But I also knew that I was running out of stuff to talk about, that I could speak about, that like I couldn't put together a training program. I couldn't talk about many things with authority. So that's when you start interviewing people who can, right? And then, I would get the odd thing where like, it was just the beginning of Twitter as well. And I would see pros engaging with things, or like, even if I did a tip where you would get some World Tour pro contributing to something I said, it was like, wow, that Simon Gerrans responded to my tweet or whatever, right? It was amazing. But like, I remember Simon Gerrans was my first interview ever. And, I was so nervous. And it was just sort of, he was in a circle of friends that I was in, and he met me, and I just thinking back, he was so generous for doing that, because like, why would he? And, but he did. And I asked him, and it was a yes right away. And, I remember asking him like, what do you eat before a race, or like all those things that people could use. Yeah. But like after, you run out of things to say, you start interviewing people, and then you start interviewing your idols and on and on. And then a few things start getting thrown your way about like tidbits of news or whatever to talk about. And yeah, it just sort of progresses from there. And you become very much a fan of the sport too, right? So you want to talk about the news. And
because at the time, cycling news was around, and it was a place that people went for results and, stories and who knows what else. That was something that you were thinking, okay, that's something that we could include some of that stuff, or were you looking at other websites as well and going, that's something we want to take from everything and morph our own path? At that moment there, when you're heading across to the tour, what was the vision of CyclingTips? As you said, it was no longer just a tip-based website. You were reviewing tech. You were going to a race. What was the vision at that point?
It was always covered as a fan, from the eyes of a fan, because I couldn't talk to Alberto Contador, but I remember one tour following Kenny Van Hummel, the Lantern Rouge, and I could talk to him maybe, and I couldn't actually, but I thought maybe I could. Like if there's one person I could talk to, it's not going to be Contador. So I'm like, covered as a fan, cover the stories that nobody else is covering. And like when I would go to the tour down under, it was like from the roadside with other fans and but also too, like I remember Cycling News still had like little pixelated photos, and gosh, they for the most part still do. And I remember like, why can't we do big photos, full screen? And I'm like, did a couple lines of code, made that all our photos full screen, and I had a lot of great people helping me, like photographers or budding photographers. One guy named Veera Patel, who I owe so much to because he was a very good photographer. Other friends of mine as well who just contributed whenever they were at a race or whatever. And it was a time of digital SLRs, and we're just like, wow, like this is, because there weren't iPhone cameras, or they weren't very good, not good enough. But I get all this amazing, like from behind the scenes photography, and we'd post that full image, and that wasn't seen anywhere. And I'm like, well, the second Cycling News wants to do that, I'm dead, because I got no differentiator. And still, most places post small photos, but it's also because, people are viewing this on mobile now, so it's not needed. But at the time I thought, let's just do these little things different, and that sort of paid off.
Tell me a little bit about when things started to just continually grow and Bike Exchange came involved with the company now. So things are really sort of amping up now, and tell me a little bit about the progression there.
Things were going well. Like we we did an event called the Giro della Donna. We're like, we're cyclists. We talk to cyclists. Why don't we do a Gran Fondo? Like the world was a blank canvas. We were just going to do whatever we felt made sense. We had a shop going. We had this editorial and advertising business going. Like it was
a merchandise shop.
Yeah. And again, this is the time of just Instagram just starting. And we started with socks and
you had an online shop or you had a space?
We had it online.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, it was online, but it was boxes back in our office and stuff. But it was also like I said, social media and 2015, but I could see what Facebook was doing to our business and where it was like really good. Like I would have X number of brands at, maybe $2,500 a month to advertise, and that ticked over every month and we were signed every year. Now it was like, okay, well, we have $2,000 to spend with you. What are you going to do? Like it was a campaign after campaign versus, hey, let's lock in a year. And this was like, this is really tough now because there's a sales cycle every time I want to do business with these guys. And there's all their money is going to Google and Facebook now. This is killing our business. And it was like, how are we going to survive? Because we weren't running out of money, but I saw this brick wall that was heading towards us. We have to change. And we started talking about how do we do a membership plan? Well, no one's going to pay for content. Like that was not at that time of the internet history that people pay.
They'll just go somewhere else. You're just trying to keep people.
Yeah.
You don't want to deter them at that point.
Yeah, exactly. And, I started thinking about like, how do I get investment? I didn't know anything about that. And, I was talking to the guys from Pink Bike, the world's largest mountain bike website, and because they're fellow Canadians, and they, neither of us really knew how to do this unless they bought CyclingTips, but they weren't going to pay anything for it either, right? And even though it was worth something, like we were probably doing like, $1 million of revenue at the time. In fact, I remember that's how much we were doing because it was just like a big landmark. Like, I can't believe we just did this. And, that, every bit was reinvested back into the business, and then we'd lose a bunch on our Gran Fondo and, and just making mistakes everywhere, but it was good. But I knew that wasn't going to last forever with the way Facebook was happening, or going about things. And so how do I get investment? Conversations with Pink Bike were not, there was no real clear way of doing this or across the globe, but Bike Exchange had just raised a whole bunch of money. And I knew this just through talk, in the town and stuff. And, and I went and spoke to the two co-founders, and with no presumptions, just like, I'd like to get into the US market and grow bigger at some time. And I know you have just opened up in the US market. Like we have a huge US audience. Is there anything we could ever do together? Because classifieds or, buy and sell had always been a mainstay of media, like in newspapers, right? Like the classified section, and, they made them a lot of money, and I knew that. And maybe this is something that could combine as well, since I don't have that and you don't have this. And on paper, it made a lot of sense. And they were extremely respectful and had big plans and visions. And they're like, well, why don't we buy you and you take a shareholding in the company? And that was, a bit of cash and then a large part in equity. And it all made sense. And that was like really, really smooth, equitable way of doing it. And we did that. And that was fantastic at first.
What's the company looking like at this point? We're about 2015. Company's about sort of, 5, 6, 7 years old, if you want to go right back to the first blog.
Yeah.
How many employees have you got? How many, riders have you got? What's to give everyone a bit of an idea? Like you said, the revenue was about $1 million at that point. Bike Exchange came in. Give us an idea of where it was sort of midway through, I guess, of this journey.
Yeah. We got an editor named Neil Rogers, who was based in Boulder. He was, came from Velo News, and then James Huang is a tech editor. James was like this. Both James and Neil were these like halo, profile hires who were really good at what they did. Like those are big names to get in the US industry, to get into that market. You'll get noticed, right? And and then a sales guy as well. I think that was 3 main hires we at the time to get into the US market. So we were, around this 10 at the time, right? We also had another sales guy as well. And so we were around 10 people at the time. And, $1 million might sound like a lot, but it's not paying for 10 people, right? And
so what was your role at that point? You weren't writing per se, or were you still writing?
I would rarely write. I was so busy. I'd have a meeting of like, are we hitting our sales targets? So what's the pipeline look like? To, hey, we're building an online store, like an online marketplace like Bike Exchange did. We're doing an event. Like it was just like a little bit of everything, and I could not focus or I didn't have expertise in anything. And then also like pushing this editorial, like I wasn't the editor, but I was really getting my hands dirty in it because I wasn't happy with it as well. Just because I didn't know how to write KPIs for that, like this creative side of the business, which I could end up ruining by putting like targets and KPIs of say traffic or whatever. And then sales was difficult. And, oh gosh, I was just spread so thin and going everywhere at the time. And it was, I've got good memories of it, but it was really tough.
In the mix of all that, and I'm just sort of relating to myself now, and I'm not saying it at all I'm at that kind of step, but sometimes it's nice, I can imagine, having someone removed from the business and people to talk to help you with the vision that you originally had. And as it sounds like here, it was a mess. There was stuff going everywhere, and you were like me, just saying yes to everything. That's a great idea. That's a great idea. Next thing you know, you've got 12 projects on the go.
Yeah.
How were you able to sort of steady the storm and actually keep focusing on your vision at that point and understand, like in the coming years, to go on that pathway?
Yeah, I always had this conflicting view of like stick with something and be really good at it, and it will become something. And then also know when to cut your losses and move on, right? So, this was still all very new with like the event and our marketplace and getting into the US market. And so it was like not late enough to say cut your losses, but also I believed in sticking with things and having good people, and we had good people. And, but like we weren't making money at this point. We were losing a lot. Yeah, like this was not profitable, and Bike Exchange were the ones who were funding this, and they had never given me any guidelines. Like they're new to this as well, right? But they never said like, here's X dollars, this is what you have to spend. It was just this kind of open checkbook, and they were burning money in their business elsewhere, and it was pretty messy. And then like that's going to stop at some time.
Was that exciting because you were able to do things you probably couldn't have done without their investment? Or was it scary because you're like, how come we're not seeing return for this stuff?
Yeah, at first it was exciting. Then after a while, it was like, this can't go on, right? Like this is, can blow $5 million in a heartbeat. And I'm like, this can't go on, but like, who's going to make the tough decision on cutting an arm of this or whatever, right? So there were scary moments in there where it was like, are we going to completely shut CyclingTips down? Like,
wow.
Like we have to raise more money to keep going. And, we would have to do that for the overall business, not just CyclingTips, like a Bike Exchange as well. And we're all in this together because I need this. I need Bike Exchange to work as well because I'm invested in this now. So it was many, many sleepless nights. And eventually it really came to like a halt. Like we had only a few months of money left for the overall business, and we have to make some really tough decisions. And meetings were going on now behind my back not behind my back, but that I wasn't invited to. I had no say in, but meanwhile, I'm still a director of not just CyclingTips, but the overall company. And I'm now like legally responsible for things that are we trading solvent? I don't know. Things like that it's really started scaring me. And I knew that, I was the ones that suggested like, we have to sell CyclingTips. Not only was CyclingTips mine, but I was a shareholder in the bigger business, which that's my future wealth. Like that's my super whatever, right? So I had to make these tough decisions as well. And, in the background, we had been talking to Pink Bike, which I knew was bought by private equity. And they were looking for possible new opportunities. And I had been speaking with those guys since I, like I said earlier, like we first spoke ages ago. So luckily we were able to do a deal with Pink Bike to buy CyclingTips. And that was at a loss, but still we were able to get out of Bike Exchange, limit that liability. I would move over, didn't have to deal with them anymore, except I was a shareholder in the business that I could make no more decisions in. It was a brutal, brutal time. Like at the time I was angry. I'm lucky I've never, had mental health issues, but looking back, like if there's any sort of depression I've ever gone through, it would have been during that time. It was like a dark period. If I had to endure that any more than 6 months or whatever, like it was horrible. But luckily that was just a circumstantial thing than a mental health issue. And I can relate to that now. And it was horrible.
Looking back on that, and if you want to pull yourself up on any kind of mistakes or, decisions that you make, would you have changed anything, because with those big decisions you were making and the money you were spending, it was growing the business. From the outside, the business was becoming bigger.
Yeah.
And it was everywhere. And, you, like you said, you were at an event or you were just growing it and people were doing more articles. But on the same side, money was being spent that you didn't have.
Yeah.
So to think back on that, what would you have changed?
I don't know if there's anything we could have changed, to be honest. Absolutely nothing. I made the best decisions I could have at the time with what was in front of me. And it's led me to where I am now. I certainly learned a lot by it going wrong. If it all went right, I wouldn't have learned anything. And it was tough at the time. It was, like I said, one of the worst times of my life, but I feel like I really grew from that, and it allows me to do and see around the corners with what I'm doing now. And I've always said I'm not going to ever make those mistakes again. I'm just going to make a whole new set of mistakes.
So Pink Bike, in a way, I guess saved CyclingTips, but CyclingTips as a brand was in a really good spot. Everyone from the outside, it was doing great things. Moving into sort of that next phase, I feel like, it's the last phase more or less. It's like CyclingTips was rising up through the pandemic before we saw the end of CyclingTips. We'll get to that in a minute, but tell me a little bit about once Pink Bike got involved and as you sort of came out of or dug yourself out of that little hole you're in.
Yeah, it's exactly right. I think from the outside, it looked like we were kicking goals and everything, and no one knew the, I guess, financial strife we were in. But within 6 months of Pink Bike acquiring us and changes we made, we were profitable again, right? It was just like, oh, this is a breath of fresh air. We're working with people who understand our business, aren't sending us off in every single direction, who are they have a structure that we can almost plug into as well, and use our people to their strengths. And I owe a lot to one person, just Kaylee Fretz, who I believe he joined when we were in Bike Exchange, or maybe just sort of on the verge actually. But he brought a lot to the table in terms of becoming our editor-in-chief and also doubling down on everyone's strengths. So as a publication, we got a lot better. Like I can't understate how much he did a good job at getting the best out of everybody, and then also everybody executing on that, right? But it was also too, like, the way Pink Bike operated in many ways, we changed to, and we didn't have an open checkbook either, right? Like, it was like, we have to make this work and here's what we have to do that. But they left me alone as well to do that. And they were very hands off, but we also were part of their, their sales team. We shared, the operations team we shared. It was like the best time in the history of CyclingTips, where we were profitable. We were doing a job that we were all happy with and we enjoyed. And it was a really, really good time. And it was a great team of people. And, we were very separate, but like we took inspiration off what Pink Bike was doing in the mountain bike world, vice versa with us. They were all people I learned a lot from. It was great. I have fond memories of that time.
Tell me about Kaylee Fretz, like you said, a really integral part of the end part of Cycling Tips.
The reason I wanted to go work there.
This is Kaylee Fretz, who came on Cycling Tips in early 2017.
And this was sort of a couple of years in the making, was I just had a huge amount of kind of respect and also interest in what he was building in that it seemed cool and new and different. I think that there was some level of kind of mutual respect for what the other person was doing. Like, he liked my work, obviously, at VeloNews. That's the reason why he wanted to hire me and bring me over. And I liked his work in terms of building this thing. And yeah, just kind of went from there, really. Wade was in the process of expanding in the US still. He had James Wong and he had Neil Rogers come on, and the US audience was growing really fast, and I think they were looking for more kind of US voices and people that could talk about bike racing, and it just worked.
Kaylee came from VeloNews, and I had crossed paths with Kaylee many times at the tour or whatever event, and always had a huge respect for what he wrote or what he did. And he had a podcast at VeloNews, which I didn't listen to, but I knew it was successful. I wasn't really into podcasts at the time. And that was the thing he said he was going to bring over. We had we got started, but it wasn't a great podcast. But at the same time, getting started is always much better than having I'd rather have a bad product and get started, right? Well, no one's listening. But he brought that aboard, kind of took it totally in-house, really nurtured that into something that was really good and became an integral part of our business. And, Neil Rogers, who was our EIC, editor-in-chief, he was taking more of a back seat and wanted to take care of his daughter more and stuff. So Kaylee stepped up and took that position. And like I said, he just got the best out of everybody. And, to everybody's credit as well, like, they did their best work at what they were good at too. So it was really, really, it wasn't a big fork in the road, but it was profound in terms of how much better it made us. And so Kaylee was huge on that front.
Well, talk to me about 2020 Outside Inc. With Pink Bike and Trail Forks. They acquired Cycling Tips. How did this all come about? Because like you said, then you're on the right sort of trajectory. You're happy working with Pink Bike. How did this next partnership, or even would you call it a partnership, how did this all come about?
Well, it was an acquisition, not really a partnership, as the press release might have said. But so Pink Bike was owned by private equity when Outside bought us. And that PE group they were really great to work with, and they had a very hands-off approach. But at the end of the day, PE's MO is usually to flip businesses. And after Outside, having raised a ton of venture capital, I assume Outside offered a price that they couldn't say no to. We didn't really have a say in any of it. And I probably shouldn't talk too much about what went on during my time at Outside. It's still relatively fresh, and I'm sure as time goes on, my emotions will fade away. But it was a pretty messed up time. But at the end of the day, I wish them all the best. There are a lot of good people who work there.
Let's talk about when things beginning to sort of downfall. When you resigned, August 2022, things started to crumble, I guess. You obviously could see that from the inside from the very beginning, day one, like you said, but you hoped for the best. You did extra little projects like Venga, but ultimately it came to a point where you're like, I'm out.
Yeah. I remember when I went back to Canada to visit family, and this was like the first time in 5 years because of the timing with COVID. And I wasn't really in a bad way mentally, but was really like, what am I going to do? Am I going to go back into, am I going to be like a salesperson for a tech company, or what am I going to do with myself? And
send Mottram an email?
That seriously crossed my mind, everything. And I had no idea, not a clue. But doing this again was not on the cards, right? I'm not going to put myself through that again. I'm not going to go and try to solve the same puzzle all over again as well. I was put into motion to basically like destroy Cycling Tips, Velo News. I was managing all of those at the time. I was not just managing Cycling Tips, and I was put into motion by some new guru of the chief content officer, and I knew that she really didn't know what we were trying to do either, and there was very little direction. It was just like, now I'm put into motion to actually destroy what I've built, and that's the last straw. I can't do that. So that was just like, no, I'm not making you this presentation outlining how we're going to kill it. Like, no decisions could be made. No one was taking responsibility for not making them. So my wife, Christine, she supported that I quit, but she just wanted to know that I had a plan. So I made up a plan. I just said, I'm starting another business. I don't know what that business is going to be, but like that was very gratifying. And maybe it'll be in, I don't know, but it'll come to me, but it'll be like starting another business. And she was like, okay, that's good enough. She's much more the risk adverse of both of us. I just know everything I've done has worked out, right? So I have faith in that. I know if I'm stressed out enough, I'll get set into action. Whether it's, like I thought about just doing a podcast, right? Like whatever, or a Substack. And that's what I did. I opened up a Substack account, just writing email newsletters. And I had quit, and I had very little contact from anybody. Actually, at Wollongong World Championships, it was very, very humbling how the Cycling Tips guys, they had a bit of a going away surprise party for me at the one of the pop-up shops there, and all of our Velo Club members. That was the membership program. Like, so many, there's probably 300 people there. I was presented with this beautiful gravel bike that Baum made for me with all the employee signatures on it. It was like, wow, like how gratifying that this journey was. Like, I have never expected that a job would give me this back. And it was just like, I couldn't believe it. And 14 years of like, all I've heard of is like, why aren't you doing this? Why did you cover it that way? Why did you, like, you're just getting like shit thrown at you from every direction, from the audience or advertisers or whatever. But now, like I kind of realized that maybe I did give a little something back, my little corner of this community, that maybe I did add something to it. And I can't tell you how gratifying that was. And it was pretty amazing. So, but still, I never wanted to do it again. Never was I going to do that again.
What about when the the staff and the employees that you sort of corroborated together and handpicked almost slowly started to be laid off, and you could slowly see that destruction? How did that make you feel?
I was blindsided by that.
Yeah, well, the big weekend was when we found out that Dave Rome, Matt Deneef, and Kaylee Fretz had all been made redundant.
This is Andy Van Bergen.
3 really, really big roles. Didn't make any sense. There wasn't a lot of justification behind that. Obviously, it was quite mortifying for the team to think that could happen. And I guess, when I was asking questions myself about how this could potentially happen, and with some of the executive team at Outside, when I felt that the justification wasn't quite there, it was an easy decision for me to not stay there myself as well. So I tendered my resignation pretty soon after as well. I think in the end, like pretty much everyone at CT decided to leave, and it shows what a strong family that group was.
Yeah, just a really hugely sad chapter, really.
This is Matt Deneef.
To see Cycling Tips go the way that it did. There were a handful of layoffs towards the back half of last year, and I was one of them in November 2022. I was very sad to leave. I thought I was still doing great work and I had a lot more to offer, but, couldn't do much about that. And then a lot of, more redundancies followed and a lot of staff left, and it didn't take long for things to fall over completely. Yeah, I think just the overwhelming feeling for me is just one of sadness that so much work kind of came to a close and that Cycling Tips now no longer exists. And it's not even like the content still exists, because in a lot of cases the old stuff that we've done hasn't survived the merger across to the new place. So, a decade or more worth of, well over a decade worth of hard work from a lot of people, it just kind of disappeared into the ether. And that's heartbreaking, for people that have contributed to the site, freelancers, and certainly for those of us that work there and put so much energy and passion and love into the project. It's heartbreaking, to be honest.
I mean, Wade was out was it September, end of August, early September?
This is Kaylee Fretz.
So he actually missed some of the best bits. And by best, I mean worst. He missed some of the worst bits because he was actually not in the organization for the sort of the real downslide at the end there. In those last couple months, what was really clear to me was that there was a pretty insurmountable difference in vision for what Cycling Tips should be, and also for the importance of things like Velo Club, the membership that we had. And there were lots of conversations that happened in that time that made that difference in vision really obvious to me. And there were some that were more heated than others. There were times when we were told to do things that we didn't think were right, and I absolutely pushed back on pretty firmly. Basically, like the disagreements came down to what I felt was sort of a lack of value put on like what made us unique, and sort of a misunderstanding of where our value actually came from. And I remain convinced that the real value of Cycling Tips was the fact that it was, it wasn't completely different, right? Like if you look at from way back, Velo News and Cycling Tips look really similar, right? They cover the same things. They're largely focused on, in fact, almost identical beats, right? But in the same way that the New York Times and Fox News, for any American listeners out there, cover ostensibly the same things, but in quite different ways. I felt like that was sort of the same case with us and Velo News.
So when Kaylee got laid off, I'm like, well, Kaylee is someone who he really does bring something to the table. We should talk, Kaylee. We started running the numbers and could this work without advertising? Could just a membership model work? We know the formula for this now. We know how to do this. And Kaylee could do the editorial side. I knew how to do the commercial side. The numbers stacked up. We could possibly do this. And this isn't starting from the same place. There was Wade's blog. We would start from a place where we could take these other people that were laid off and maybe build something, right? And, we had a lot of goodwill and just our names. And sadly, Cycling Tips was just being chipped away at because of, what Outside was doing. And I honestly hoped, I really didn't want that to happen. I wanted to leave behind a legacy of I built this and I can look at that with pride. But that was not what was happening, right? And especially after they left, things started changing in a hurry. And names that I'd never heard of before started writing for it. And now it was completely unrecognizable to me, right? People were leaving because it was just one by one, people were leaving the business that I had hired or Kaylee had hired. Yeah, so it was just now it's this thing. The only thing I recognized was the logo, and I wish it did carry on, right? But now to this point, it's now gone. It's literally not even a Wikipedia page exists on it. 15 years work of my life just now completely gone because all the backlinks are broken. But I've got no regrets. I've got no. I'm not angry at anybody at Outside. I'm glad. I hope they do, bring something to the cycling community. I legitimately do. And yeah, but just all our work is gone. And that's sad because there's nothing left.
Now thinking about where you are going, and you've spoken about it a little bit now, Escape Collective, firstly, you spoke about talking with Kaylee, hey, this is what we know from Cycling Tips. This is what we want to do. These are the sort of things we liked. what have you learnt from that process, those 14 years, that you're now moving to this new space, similar space? What are the key things you've learnt that you're going to go, right, that's it. I learnt this. This is a common mistake I was making, or this was the one big mistake. Looking back, going into doing, this new venture.
One thing is that who you take money from matters with investment. Like, all money is not created equal, and who you take it from with their investment, because we needed to get some friends and family money to get this going, right? And I was very careful with who I asked and what their expectations were and what happens if I lost it all. I'm a lot more concerned about losing friends and family money than I am my own, because that's like an embarrassment, a responsibility, a promise. If I lost my own, no one else has to know except me and my wife.
Just go work in a factory and get it back.
Yeah, but like this comes with a lot more responsibility, I find. And if I was to take institutional investor money, like there's only a few ways that can go. That's like you go public, within a certain time frame, you sell to a strategic buyer in a certain time frame, or you go bust. Like there's not many ways to go. The other thing I learned was like, I know shareholder documents inside and out because it went wrong and I had to rely on the edge case scenarios that you need to consider. All the legals up front with starting a new business. I knew how to structure this, so I am going to stay in control with these decisions for a long, long time to come.
But what you take out of that process, and I say this about can only refer back to when I was racing, I set myself the goal. Most times I didn't actually achieve the end goal, but it was what I tried to achieve on the way there that I learnt so much out of it. It was a failure because I didn't get the goal, but didn't mean the whole project was a failure because I did all these things trying to achieve this goal, and that led me down another road.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I completely agree. Fail quick is always this sort of saying, and that I don't like that saying because like you have to actually don't fail and drop it. Like fail, but like move the goalposts, go aim somewhere else. Don't take it as a failure. That's for sure. Right. And don't give it up. Don't just leave it all like on the table. That journey is an amazing thing. And gosh, the life, Mitch, like this journey, even just sitting here today, speaking with you, for example, like, it's like, holy shit, I got to pinch myself a million times. Like, I just remember back when the first product launch I ever went to, when it was just me as a blog, BMC asked me to come to Switzerland for a product launch. And I got to go to the Tour de France after that. And that was, at the time, the closest thing to a dream coming true I've ever had. I get to go to the Tour de France. Like, what? Like, it was beyond my wildest dreams. I never thought I'd go to the Tour de France. It wasn't even something I dreamt for. I don't have big dreams in life, but so many things that I've just been sitting around thinking like, this is a moment where I have to just reflect on. And that's what it's taken me on. I don't know where this is going to take me, this escape journey. But we haven't reached cruising altitude yet. Like, we're just on liftoff and we're burning a lot of fuel to get there. Right. But, so I've got to be very careful, and I'm not getting cocky by any means. I'm not resting on our laurels, and, we'll see where it goes.
That was my last question, to ask you what the vision was of Escape, and you more or less answered it then, that you're not exactly sure yet. You just you've set up the foundation of what you've learnt from those years and what you've taken the good parts from it. Like you said, I'm not going to get involved in advertising, and I want to build this membership base, which you've done. I guess, do you have anything more to add on, where the future lies for, Wade Wallace I'm sure you've done a little 10-year plan.
Yeah.
I don't need to hear all the nuts and bolts of it, but, just to give everyone a bit of an idea of how this is going to be different, or maybe it's not going to be different.
Yeah. The luxury we have this time around is to start with the end in mind. And the most fundamental thing that we're doing differently is that we're starting off with a membership business model. And what I mean by that, and why it's so important to us, is because if we create content of value that people will actually pay us for, that's a really, really good thing. The incentives are in line for us to create the best content we can for our members. And that gives us a predictable revenue stream and predictable cost structure such that we can service that and grow based on that. We have the confidence to invest when we have that business model. So that's really important. I know things are going to change 100 times in the next 10 years, but for now, I've taken a lot of inspiration from the website, The Athletic. And if you're not familiar with The Athletic, it's a sort of a mainstream sports website that has seen the destruction of local reporting and local sports coverage. And they've brought that back under a member model. And, any team, any player, whatever, there's going to be a reporter covering that for your local favorite NHL, NFL team or whatever. So that's really, really cool. And I think it's a huge amount of value and I absolutely love it. And I see what they're doing and could think of nothing better than to do this for all the different niches within cycling, right? Whether it's tech or racing or gravel or bike packing or mountain biking, it's endless. And, to be something to somebody rather than everything to nobody is kind of the goal here. And we want to go deep with these various niches. And that's important to us. And I think media is going to be unrecognizable in the next 5 years with these large language models coming out. But, I want to be flexible so that we can experiment and embrace the change. And I see a lot of opportunity there. But the one fundamental truth that will always endure is that a good story will always be a good story. And that's what's never going to change with us, right? So we're going to keep telling them.
Brilliant, mate. I was going to ask you one last question. This is just for me, life in the peloton, and I know you've given a couple of bits of advice to me already. If you could just sort of sum it up to other entrepreneurs out there, in their bedroom blogging, podcasting. I know there's a million people out there podcasting and trying to start something up. I've reached out to you for advice off air because I value that real advice you give. You don't talk over my head. You can relate to me where I'm at. I guess, to sum it up, can you give people like myself or even a young version of yourself that piece of advice?
Yeah. I would probably say like you've done, you don't need to wait for everything to be perfect and $1 million in your bank account to start. Like, you can start with a single podcast or a single pair of socks, right? Like, and that's what a lot of people, they just get like hung up on this vision of like, I want to start the biggest apparel company on earth or biggest media brand on earth or whatever it might be. But like, it all starts at like one thing, right? And building on top of another. And maybe one of the best pieces of advice that I've ever had that I always think about is my brother-in-law. He just said, just show up, right? And what he means by that is like, go to, when he gave it to me, it was like, we're sitting there in Belgium, Amstel Gold Race was like 2 hours down the road. Like, I'm just going to watch this on TV today, right? And he's like, no, go. Like, you just got to show up, right? You know what's going to happen if you sit on the couch and you watch the TV, nothing. You're going to watch Amstel Gold Race. But if you show up to that race, you don't know who you're going to bump into. And
something will happen.
Something will happen. But it's so easy, since you don't know what'll happen, don't go. So anyway, I bumped into Phil Anderson, and Phil was on his 30th anniversary of when he won it or whatever. I bumped into Phil, and Phil invites me to the VIP area. I bump into some more friends, and I just had the best day of my entire life at Amstel Gold Race. Meanwhile, I could have been sitting on the couch. And that has just happened time and time again where like someone wants to have coffee with me who, and I'm like, why am I doing this? But I just show up and some profound piece of advice or another connection comes out of it. Or a year down the road, I bump into that person. It does lead to something. Like, just show up is the smallest, easiest thing you can do, but it has led me in so many directions. Like, not only at Amstel Gold, but like commercially as well in my career. So those two things I think are just pretty good pieces of advice that have been given to me that I live by. I hope you enjoyed this episode that was a bit different than the rest. For a long time now, people have been asking me to tell the Cycling Tips story, but I knew for the past couple years that it wasn't complete yet. Now the story is finished, and while I wish that it ended differently, I'm immensely thankful for the journey. If it had gone any other way, I wouldn't be here right now with this wonderful group of people here at the Escape Collective. I have countless people to thank who have helped me over the years who were not mentioned here. You know who you are, and please know that your contribution, no matter how small, will never be forgotten. Thanks for listening, and thank you to Mitch Docker for helping us tell our story and for putting this all together.